Ladies and gentlemen, it is 2 years since I last spoke in the United States. In the lecture I then gave, I had reasons to refer to the great, fabulous Franz Kafka, and in particular to his story, Report to an Academy, about an educated ape who read Peter, who stands before the members of a learned society telling the story of his life, of his ascent from beast to something approaching man. On that occasion, I felt a little bit like Red Peter myself and said so. Today, this feeling is even stronger for reasons that I hope will become clearer to you. Lectures often begin with light-hearted remarks whose purpose is to set the audience at ease. The comparison I've just drawn between myself and Kafka's ape might be taken as such a light-hearted remark meant to set you at ease, meant to say, I'm just an ordinary person, neither God nor a beast. Even those among you who read Kafka's stories of the ape who performs before human beings as an allegory of Kafka the Jew performing for Gentiles may nevertheless, in view of the fact that I am not a Jew, have done me the kindness of taking the comparison at face value. That is to say, ironically, I want to say at the outset that this is not how my remark, the remark that I felt like Red Peter myself, was intended. I did not intend it ironically. It means what it says. I say what I mean. I'm an old woman. I do not have the time any longer to say things I do not mean. In addressing you on the subject of animals, I will pay you the honor of skipping a recital of the horrors of their lives and death. Though I have not any reason to believe that you have at the forefront of your minds what has been done at this very moment in production facilities, I hesitate to call them farms, in abattoirs, in trawlers, in laboratories, all over the world. I will take it that you conceive me that I have the rhetorical power to evoke these horrors and bring them home to you with adequate force and leave it at that, reminding you only that the horrors I here omit are nevertheless in the center of this lecture. Between 1942 and 1945, several million people were put to death in the concentration camps of the Third Reich. At Treblinka alone, more than 1.5 million, perhaps as many as 3 million. These are numbers that numb the mind. We have only one death of our own. We can comprehend the death of others only one at a time. In the abstract, we can count to 1 million, but we cannot count to 1 million deaths. The people who lived in the countryside around Treblinka, Poles at the most part, said that they did not know what was going on in the camp, said while in a general way they might have guessed what was going on, they did not know for sure. They said that while in one sense they might have known, in another sense they did not know. They could not afford to know for their own sake. It is not because they waged an expansionist war and lost it that Germans of a particular generation are still regarded as standing a little outside humanity, as having to do or be something special before they can be readmitted to the human fold. They lost their humanity in our eyes because of a certain willed ignorance on their part. Under the circumstances of Hitler's kind of war, ignorance may have been a useful survival mechanism, but that is an excuse which, with admirable moral rigor, we refuse to accept. In Germany, we say a certain line was crossed which took people beyond the ordinary murderousness and cruelty of warfare into a state that we can only call sin. The signing of the Articles of Capitulation and the payment of reparations did not put an end to that state of sin. On the contrary, we said, a sickness of the soul continued to mark that generation. It marked those citizens of the Reich who had committed evil actions, but also those who, for whatever reason, had been in ignorance of those actions. It thus marked every citizen of the Reich. Only those in the camps were innocent. They went like sheep to the slaughterhouse. They died like animals. The Nazi butchers killed them. Denunciation of the camps reverberates so fully with the language of the stockyard and slaughterhouse that it is barely necessary for me to prepare the ground for the comparison I'm about to make. The crime of the Third Reich, says the voice of accusation, was to treat people like animals. We belong to a civilization deeply rooted in Greek and Judeo-Christian religious thought. We may not all of us believe in pollution, we may not believe in sin, but we do believe in their psychic correlates. We accept without question that the psyche or soul touched with guilty knowledge cannot be well. We do not accept that people with crimes on their conscience can be healthy and happy. We look or used to look askance at Germans of a certain generation because they are, in a sense, polluted in the very signs of their normality, their healthy appetites, their hearty laughter. We see proof of how deeply rooted pollution is in them. It wasn't inconceivable that people who did not know in that special sense about the camps can be fully human. In our chosen metaphorics, it was they and not their victims who were the beasts. By treating fellow human beings, beings created in the image of God, like beasts, they had themselves become beasts. I was taken on a drive around Warsaw this morning. It seems a pleasant enough city. I saw no horrors, No drug testing laboratories, no factory farms, no abattoirs. Yet I'm sure they are there. They must be. They simply do not advertise themselves. They are all around us as I speak. Only we do not, in a certain sense, know about them. Let me say it openly. We are surrounded by an enterprise of degradation, cruelty and killing, which rivals anything the Third Reich was capable of, indeed dwarfs it, in that ours is an enterprise without end, self-regenerating, bringing rabbits, rats, poultry, livestock ceaselessly into the world for the purpose of killing them. And to split hairs, to claim that there is no comparison, that Replica was, so to speak, a metaphysical enterprise dedicated to nothing but death and annihilation, while the meat industry is ultimately devoted to life. Once its victims are dead, after all, it does not burn them to ash or bury them, but packs them up and refrigerates them, and then packs them up again so that they can be consumed in the comfort of our homes, is as little consolation to those victims as it would have been, pardon me the tastelessness of the following, to ask the dead of Treblinka to excuse their killers because their body fat was needed to make soap and their hair to stuff mattresses with. Pardon me, I repeat. That is the last cheap point I will be scoring. I know how talk of this kind polarizes people, and cheap point scoring only makes it worse. I want to find a way of speaking to fellow human beings that will be cool rather than heated, philosophical rather than polemical, that will bring enlightenment rather than seeking to divide us into the righteous and the sinners, the saved and the damned, the sheep and the goats. Now that I'm here, says Red Peter, in my tuxedo and bow tie, my black pants, with a hole cut in the seat for my tail to poke through. I keep it turned away from you, you do not see it. Now that I'm here, says Red Peter, in my tuxedo and bow tie, my black pants, with a hole cut in the seat for my tail to poke through. I keep it turned away from you, you do not see it. Now that I'm here, what is there to do for me? Do I have a choice? If I do not subject my discourse to reason, whatever that is, what is left for me but to gibber and to emote and knock over my water glass and generally make a monkey out of myself. Red Peter was not an investigator of primate behavior, but a branded, marked, wounded animal presenting himself as speaking testimony for a gathering of scholars. I'm not a philosopher of mind, but an animal, exhibiting yet not exhibiting to a gathering of scholars, a wound which I cover up under my clothes but touch on it in every word I speak. In 1912, the Prussian Academy of Sciences established on the island of Tenerife a station devoted to experimentation into the mental capacities of apes, particularly chimpanzees. The station operated until 1920. Let me recount to you some of what the apes on Tenerife learned from their master Wolfgang Kohler, in particular Sultan, the best of his pupils, in a certain sense, the prototype of Red Peter. Sultan is alone in his pen. He's hungry. The food that used to arrive regularly has unaccountably ceased coming. The man who used to feed him and has now stopped feeding him stretches a wire over the pen 3 meters above ground level and hangs a bunch of bananas from it. Into the pen, he drags 3 wooden crates. Then he disappears, closing the gate behind him, though he's still somewhere in the vicinity, since one can smell him. Sultan knows. Now one is supposed to think. That is what the bananas are for, up there. The bananas are there to make one think, to spur one to the limits of one's thinking. But what must one think? One thinks, why is he starving me? One thinks, what have I done? Why has he stopped liking me? Huh? One thinks, why does he not want these crates anymore? But none of these is the right thought. Even a more complicated thought, for instance, what is wrong with him? What misconception does he have of me that leads him to believe it is easier for me to reach a banana hanging from a wire than to pick up the banana on the ground? It's wrong. The right thought to think is, how does one use the crates to reach the bananas? Oh, Sultan drags the crates under the bananas, piles them one on top of the other, climbs the tower he has built, and pulls down the bananas. He thinks, now will he stop punishing me? The answer is no! The next day the man hangs a fresh bunch of bananas from the wire, but also fills the crates with stones so that they are too heavy to be dragged. One is not supposed to think, why has he filled the crates with stones? One is supposed to think, how does one use the crates to get the bananas despite the fact that they are filled with stones? One is beginning to see how the mind of the man works. Oh, Sultan empties the stones from the crates, builds a tower with the crates, climbs the tower, and pulls down the bananas. As long as Sultan continues to think wrong thoughts, he's starved. He's starved until the pangs of hunger are so intense, so overriding, that he's forced to think the right thought, namely, how to go about getting the bananas. Thus are the mental capabilities of the chimpanzee tested to their uttermost. The man drops a bunch of bananas a meter outside the wire pen. Into the pen, he tosses a stick. The wrong thought is, why has he stopped hanging the bananas off the wire? The wrong thought is the right wrong thought, however, is, how does one use the 3 crates to reach the bananas? The right thought is, how does one use the stick to reach the bananas? At every turn, Sultan is driven to think the less interesting thought. From the purity of speculation, Why do men behave like this? He is relentlessly propelled towards lower, practical, instrumental reason. How does one use this to get that? And thus towards acceptance of himself as primarily an organism with an appetite that needs to be satisfied. Although his entire history, from the time his mother was shot and he was captured, through his voyage in a cage to imprisonment on the island prison camp, and the sadistic games that are played around food here, leads him to ask questions about the justice of the universe and the place of this penal colony in it. A carefully plotted psychological regimen conducts him away from ethics and metaphysics towards the humbler reaches of practical reason. And somehow, as he inches through his labyrinth of constraint, manipulation, and duplicity, he must realize that on no account dare he give up, for on his shoulders rests the responsibility of representing apedom. The fate of his brothers and sisters may be determined by how well he performs. Only the experimenter's single-minded regimentation forces him to concentrate on it. The question that truly occupies him, as it occupies the rat and the cat and every other animal trapped in the hell of the laboratory or of the zoo, is where is home? And how do I get there? Measure the distance back from Kafka's ape, with his bow tie and dinner jacket and read of lectures notes, to that sad train of captives trailing around the compound of Tenerife. How far Ed Peter has traveled. Yet we are entitled to ask, in return for the prodigious overdevelopment of the intellect he has achieved, in return for his command of lecture hall etiquette and academic rhetoric, what had he to give up? The answer is much, including progeny, succession. If Ed Peter had any sense, he would not have any children. For upon the desperate, half-mad female ape with whom his captors in Kafka's story try to mate him, he would only father a monster. It is as hard to imagine the child of Red Peter as to imagine the child of Kafka himself. Hybrids are or ought to be sterile. And Kafka saw both himself and Red Peter as hybrids, as monstrous thinking devices mounted inexplicably on suffering animal bodies. The stare that we meet in all the surviving photographs of Kafka is a stare of pure surprise, astonishment, alarm. Of all men, Kafka is the most insecure in his humanity. This, he seems to say, this is the image of God. I return to the death camps. The particular horror of the camps, the horror that convinces us that what went on there was a crime against humanity, is not that despite a humanity shared with their victims, the killers treated them like lice. That is too abstract. The horror is that the killers refused to think themselves into the place of their victims, as did everyone else. They said it is they in those cattle cars rattling past. They did not say, how would it be if I were in that cattle car? They did not say, it is I who am in that cattle car. They said, it must be the dead who are being burned today, making the air stink and falling in ash on my cabbages. They did not say, how would it be if I were burning? They did not say, I'm burning, I'm falling into ashes. In other words, they closed their hearts. The heart is the seat of a faculty, sympathy, that allows us to share at times the being of another. Sympathy has everything to do with the subject and little to do with the object. The another, as we see at once when we think of the object not as a bat, can I share the being of a bat, but as another human being. There are people who have the capacity to imagine themselves as someone else. And there are people who have no such capacity. When the lack is extreme, we call them psychopaths. And there are people who have the capacity but choose not to exercise it. I return one last time to the places of death all around us, the places of slaughter to which in a huge communal effort we close our hearts. Each day a fresh holocaust, yet as far as I can see, our moral being is untouched. We do not feel tainted. We can do anything, it seems, and come away clean. We point to the Germans and to the Poles and Ukrainians who did and did not know of the atrocities around them. We like to think they were inwardly marked by the after effects of that special form of ignorance. We like to think that in their nightmares, the ones whose suffering they had refused to enter came back to haunt them. We like to think they woke up haggard in the mornings and died of gnawing cancers. But probably it was not so. The evidence points in the opposite direction, that we can do anything and get away with it, that there is no punishment. What I believe, I was born in the city of Melbourne, but spent part of my childhood in rural Victoria, in a region of climatic extremes, of scorching droughts, followed by torrential rains that swelled the rivers with the carcasses of drowned animals. That, anyhow, is how I remember it. When the water subsided, I'm speaking of the waters of a river in particular now, the Dalgannon. Acres of muds were left behind. In the night you could hear the belling of tens of thousands of little frogs rejoicing in the largesse of the heavens. The air would be as dense with their calls as it was at noon with the rasping of cicadas. But where do they suddenly come from, those thousands of frogs? The answer is they are always there. In the dry season, they go underground, burrowing further and further from the heat of the sun, until each one has created a little tomb for itself. And in those tombs, they die. Their heartbeat slows, their breathing stops. They turn the color of mud. Once again, the nights are silent. Silent until the next rains come, rapping, as it were, on thousands of tiny coffin lids. And in those coffins, hearts begin to beat again, limbs begin to twitch, that for months were lifeless. The dead awake. As the cake mud softens, the frogs begin their way out again. And soon their voices resound under the walls of the heavens. Excuse my language. I am or have been a professional writer. I usually take care to conceal the extravagances of imagination. But today, on this occasion, I thought I would conceal nothing. Bare all. The vivifying flood, the chorus of joyous belling, followed by the subsiding of the waters, and the retreat to the grave, then drought seemingly without end, then fresh rains, and the resurrection of the dead. It is a story I present transparently without disguise.